Hi everyone, I'm joined today by Dmitry Polyansky, the first deputy permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Glenn.
I want to speak with you regarding the developments with negotiations, but I first wanted to address the more, dramatic escalations lately, which was the attacks on Russia's nuclear forces. Now, obviously, it's a very dangerous development, but what is the wider significance? Do you see any Western involvement here, and what kind of response might we expect from Russia?
Well, it's hard to say about Western involvement at this stage. I know that the investigation is still ongoing, and there are some indications that Ukraine wasn't able to do it alone, as, for example, all the so-called Ukrainian attacks in the Black Sea. Everybody knows that they're being done by the UK, and the drones are provided by the UK intelligence data. Maybe Ukrainians are just hitting the button, but it doesn't make this attack Ukrainian. So it's I wouldn't at this stage speculate on the exact level of involvement of the foreign, particularly British special services, but very many things indicate towards this direction. Even the propaganda effect that they tried to get from what happened was quite visible. I mean, the efforts to frame what has happened in the necessary way was quite obvious. For example, in the UK, I saw the news, the first piece of news about this on the BBC, for example. BBC totally omitted anything that happened in connection to this, and this was the blowing of passenger trains, the bridges over the passenger trains, and a lot of casualties. All these things were absolutely ignored. It's not necessary for ordinary British citizens to know all these things. And of course, the scope of the attack was exaggerated on purpose. Of course, this is not a very significant, I would say, blow to our military and nuclear forces. This is sensitive, but not, I wouldn't overestimate its significance, and it doesn't undermine any potential of Russia. But of course, this is also a indication of the recklessness of the Kiev regime, because they absolutely know that any attack on nuclear forces of the Russian Federation can trigger nuclear response according to our new doctrine. The other thing is that we behave in a very balanced and civilized way, but they try to provoke a big reply from our part, preferably with nuclear weapons, to make it a big international outcry and to make their dream come true. The involvement, the direct involvement of NATO, who would save the guts of Zelensky and his team, because there is no other way they can have any positive outcome of this military campaign. That's quite clear. So again, the attack was sensitive, but I wouldn't over exaggerate its importance. And what is very unthoughtful of our Western colleague is that they try to ignore the attacks on civilian infrastructure, the casualties among civilian trains that were hit during the same day. And this is, of course, cynicism and double standards. I don't know how to call it otherwise.
No, I picked up on the absence of the attacks on the trains as well in the media. That was, yeah, concerning. But I was thinking also about arms control because a lot of arms control rests on the need for transparency. Do you know anything yet about what the Russian response might be in terms, does it nuclear bombers have to go underground or under hardened storage? I mean, has there been any decisions in this area?
I think that, of course, there will be some lessons learned from this, not only by Russia, but I think, but everybody else, because this is the military campaign that is being watched by everybody, and everybody tries to kind of calculate what kind of military doctrine we are having right now, and you see that the war has changed. The war has totally changed since 2022, and the only two countries who know for sure what it is Russia and Ukraine, and a lot of others, of course, want to learn our experience because it's not what they thought how military campaign might look like. Of course, we will make some conclusions out of this, and I think that the vulnerabilities like this will be curtailed. It goes without saying. It goes without saying.
And well, just regarding the negotiations, I guess it has moved much, but the fact that that there are negotiations would be positive. Indeed, the prisoner exchanges show the value of diplomacy, as we saw, 1,000 men on each side being able to go home to their families. But in terms of finding wider solution, the sides still seem pretty far apart. Do you see any gradual progress? Are the formats are they moving towards a common format, or how can they make sense of the negotiations? I guess many people, no one expected this to be over in 24 hours or Trump's 100 days, but is there a movement? Because there's a lot of parties to this conflict, and there's the positions are very much divergent. So is there movement?
Whether there is a movement or there is no movement depends very much on your perspective. If a movement for somebody is, upholding the absolutely unrealistic and crazy demands of Ukraine, I think there is no movement. If the movement is direct negotiations between the two belligerent countries and some humanitarian decisions which affect life of ordinary people in Russia and Ukraine, I think there is big movement. And also, it's not only about prisoner exchange. Recently, there was this arrangement about Russia returning 6,000 bodies of Ukrainians who were killed in combat, and there was some kind of hesitation on behalf of Kiev regime because acknowledging the fact that there is such a big number of casualties and such a big number of corpses that are not being requested by Ukrainian state is a bit embarrassing. Everybody can understand it. But now they finally had to admit, first they tried to say that these are not non-identified bodies, but we of these corpses, because Ukraine said that they also want to return our corpses to us. We said, okay, it's a very welcome move. So they returned 27 corpses and we returned 1,200 corpses, just to understand the its desire to be realistic and practical. We have shared our vision in form of memorandum. They shared their vision in form of their memorandum. I think that the next step right now would be to study these memorandums and to come back for an exchange sometimes, hopefully in June. But I'm not in the loop, so I'm not capable of giving you any more precise information on this. But in any case, if you watch it from this perspective, I think that things have moved significantly, and I think that President Trump's effort contributed a lot to the fact that Ukraine became more flexible and that Ukraine finally decided to resume negotiations that were interrupted in Istanbul in February, or from February to April 2022. I think this is very important.
Yeah, well, in terms of negotiations, I have a question about the format because a key complaint or weakness by the Minsk agreement since 2015 was that it was only between then Kiev and Donbass. Many argued Russia should be a party. Russia argued, NATO was obviously a party to the conflict. But why is if everyone recognizes that this is a proxy war, as Marco Rubio or Boris Johnson has recognized, well, wouldn't it be also sensible to have a format of NATO Russia or US Russia negotiations? Because it is, if we see that this conflict, the source of it would be the breakdown of the European security architecture. I mean, even anti-Russian hawks, such as General Kellogg, said that Russia has reasonable security concerns regarding NATO expansion, which also have to be applied to Georgia, Moldova. So if we recognize this, why is this not also a component of Russia talking with the US? Because ending NATO expansion doesn't have to be a commitment by Ukraine. They can change their minds tomorrow, and probably Russia wouldn't trust it that much if it only came from Ukraine. Why wouldn't it be a commitment from the United States instead, in a wider security agreement on European security? Again, if the main idea is to fix the roots of what caused this war.
I think we will come to this. And us having direct negotiations with Ukrainians does not prevent us from having negotiations with the US. And I know that the dialogue continues. There are exchanges at different levels. And I heard that there will be another round of negotiations between foreign ministry experts on the problems in our bilateral relations. So it doesn't mean that we are concentrated only on one track. As for European side and NATO side, I think they have not yet grown up to this, and they still live in the illusions of possibility of inflicting some kind of problems to Russia. They're not speaking about strategic defeat anymore, but they want to make our country bleed as much as possible. That's quite clear. So they haven't yet surpassed this childish logic at this stage, and we can wait. But as for the United States, I have no indications that our dialogue stopped and in anticipation of the result of negotiations with Ukraine. I think it continues, and this is a parallel track. You know that at the negotiations with the US, our negotiations with the US are not limited to the Ukrainian issue. They are much more significant and important, and there were indications also that Russia might be instrumental in finding a solution to the crisis around Iranian nuclear problem, about some other issues. So I think we are only at the beginning of this journey, but the direct negotiations with Ukraine are of paramount importance for stopping of this conflict and for addressing its root causes. I think that we will not make another mistake like what was done in case of Minsk agreements for different reasons, and we will not be as naive as before. This was stated repeatedly by President Putin, by Minister Lavrov, by a lot of other officials. I think that our position is absolutely crystal clear to everybody.
How much of the US-Russia relations depends on the war in Ukraine? Because people like Marco Rubio also pointed out that there's a need to restore basic diplomacy, reopen consulates and such. But to what extent is it possible to, I guess, develop the US-Russia relationship without solving Ukraine? Because this would be a continuous, I guess, thorn in the side of both.
Well, Russia can't solve the Ukrainian problem alone. We can continue our special military operation and get what we want. I mean, eradicate the root causes of the crisis through military means, and this is an option. But Russia displayed readiness to do it through negotiations and so save a lot of lives and efforts and money. And this was an standing and open offer from our part. But well, we can bring the horse to the water, but we can't make it drink. That's what's happening. So if Ukraine doesn't want peace, if President Zelensky and his proxies have some other anti-Russian calculations, we can't do anything about it. And I think that the US understands it quite well. And I wouldn't limit, again, Russia-US dialogue to discussing situation around Ukraine. And I wouldn't say that because of the fact that our negotiations with Ukraine haven't progressed to the extent that maybe somebody would like to see it in Washington or elsewhere, that because of this, our contacts with the US are stalled. I don't have such an impression neither here in the UN or from the news that I receive from my capital. I think that this is an ongoing process. Dynamics could be more important and significant, but there are many reasons why it is as it is. And I think this is in the interest of the whole world, and it goes far beyond the issues related to the Ukrainian crisis. It is affecting each and every country in the world, and Russia and the US together need to find solutions to a lot of issues that are important for every citizen of the globe. So let's view it from this viewpoint.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear this diplomacy at least have started and actually progressing, because this idea that the two largest nuclear powers in the world shouldn't have diplomatic relations, it is yeah, tragic. And as many in the US also recognize this, you can't really solve a lot of problems unless there's some form of cooperation between the two countries. But on restoring diplomatic relations, do you see any place in these talks with the Europeans? I know they're still not, picking up the phone, but is it does it have any relevance anymore? Or how do you see the role of the Europeans in any of this revival of diplomacy? Because you're now talking to the Ukrainians, you're trying to improve bilateral relations with the Americans. Is there anything happening with the Europeans at all?
Well, not to my knowledge. And you say restoring diplomatic relations, I would correct you a little bit. We still have diplomatic relations. We don't have diplomatic relations only with Ukraine. But of course, this level of relations that we have, sometimes we don't have ambassadors in some countries. And of course, the personnel in some embassies, whether we be it in Russia or Russian embassies in European countries, the personnel there is not has been reduced to the moment where it really can cover only bare necessities of diplomatic interaction, but nobody is speaking about anything more. And this is not normal, of course. It was not our initiative to lead these things to this absurd situation. It was the choice of Europeans, and it's up to them to decide whether they want to do something about it or not. You asked about their role. I would say that the European role, I'm speaking about mostly EU, UK. There are some sane countries within Europe as well, and sane voices also in the countries where the leadership is a little bit strange. Let's put it mildly. But nevertheless, the global role of Europe is very destructive, because it's quite clear that together with the Kiev regime, they really want to undermine the ongoing efforts between Russia and the US to bring an end to this war, to find a durable, lasting, and sustainable solution by also addressing the root causes of the crisis. The Europeans don't want it. They want to continue everything that creates problem for Russia. This was their long-term strategy. They have clearly defined Russia as their enemy. You heard that in the UK, the current leadership has started to prepare population to put up with the idea that the UK is going at some point at war with Russia. It comes even to this extreme. But, well, they try to undermine all these efforts, and they try also at the same time not to scare away President Trump and his team, and to kind of make him continue, at least in certain form, the support for Ukraine, which is instrumental, which is very important for Ukraine to be able to fight back, at least to a certain extent. And Europe alone, as it was repeatedly acknowledged by a number of experts, can hardly afford continuing this burden of supporting Ukraine without the United States. And that's the main preoccupation of Europe right now. They want to sit on two chairs. On the one hand, to display readiness to the peaceful openings by President Trump. On the other hand to continue support to Ukraine. And if it were not for the change of tune in Washington, I think they would have continued with the same thesis and on the same actions that they did before President Trump took over office. This is not their choice. They are forced to be there in this awkward situation, and they try to find a solution from this situation, which still, according to their playbook, lies in countering Russia and fighting Russia, because their mood is totally Russophobic, and we feel it. And that's why it's hard to imagine what kind of contacts and negotiations and whatever can happen in such an atmosphere, which has been deliberately poisoned by these countries, and it had been poisoned for many years. So that's where we are.
My last question is about this, the Americans walking away. This has become a common theme that if they couldn't get the peace they wanted, they would walk away. Now, after speaking with President Putin, well, President Trump made this comment yet again that it's maybe they should just walk away and wait for, someone to call them once they got sick of it, something along a bit condescending remarks, but how do you interpret this walking away? Does this entail not disengaging from the peace talks, or does it entail also cutting the weapon supplies? In other words, America stop participating in the war?
Well, I'm not an American. It's very hard for me to understand what is the the way of thought in Washington right now. What is being cooked there? But I feel that the new administration genuinely wants to find an end to this conflict, and maybe it's not because of some extreme love to Russia. It's because of some pragmatic calculations, and this is a big burden on the U.S. economy. This is a big, problem for other plans of American administration. I think this is very pragmatic, but they really want to put an end to this conflict, and Europe feels it. At the same time, when the Americans started to get deeper involved in the understanding of what has happened, they couldn't help finding out a lot of very uncomfortable things for Kiev regime, for the previous administration, for Europe. So it's very hard for them to ignore the fact that it was NATO which initiated this crisis. It was long-term, many-year policy of provoking Russia, creating this anti-Russian project next to our borders, of arming Ukraine. These are things on the surface, and you can't ignore it only if you are absolutely unscrupulous politically and you don't care about any prospect of peace. So Trump administration does care about this. And that's why they are in a very, uncomfortable situation, because they want, on the one hand, they want to walk away and they want to leave it to Europeans. On the other hand, they see that there are a lot of things that happened there because of America, because of previous administration. There are a lot of unfair things that had been done to Russia by Europeans, by NATO, and these were the administration, as somebody else would prefer another version of Minsk agreements, but we repeatedly said that this is not something that will satisfy us, and they have to take into consideration this position, which is logical and consistent.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling somewhat optimistic about your optimism about the talks with the United States, at least. Well, there hasn't been many good news over the past 3 years, so at least that's something. So again, yeah, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you.